So I've been doing these audiophile builds lately, and I'm trying to kind of achieve a certain type of sound or a certain quality of sound at a specific price tag. And one of the goals of the show is to highlight sort of where you can save your money and get really similar results to the particular system that I'm showing off. And sometimes those systems, for the cost of them, are some of the best systems that you can get for the money. But today, we're not gonna do any of that. Today, we're just gonna be doing something that is absolute overkill for the sake of doing something that is absolutely overkill. Quick disclosure here, this system costs over $13,000. This is not something that I would recommend anybody purchasing. That's a ridiculous amount of money for audio equipment. I think you can get great sound for significantly less. This is simply just a video for fun, so please take it as that. So the build is actually pretty simple. I went with a tube theme with a planar headphone, which is very odd, but I'll explain my choice in a second here. So first up, we have the Manly Absolute Headphone Amplifier, and it's actually called the Absolute Headphone Amplifier. So this thing is a tube amplifier. It is only an amp. It doesn't have a DAC in it. It's actually a single-ended amp that can convert to an XLR output, but it's actually not truly balanced. It's got not only a very unique look, but a pretty unique sound and some tone controls and some options that we'll talk about in a second. Then we're using the Hifi IDSD Pro DAC. Now, this thing is actually an all-in-one unit. It's a pretty good all-in-one unit too. It's got a lot of different options, got headphone outputs. It can do a lot of things. It fills many roles. At the $2,500 asking price though, it's not the best at any one particular job though. And that's one of the areas where I would normally come in here and say, I would suggest if you're just using a DAC, saving a lot of money and going with X or Y option. But again, we're talking about overkill here. So it's about $4,500 for the amplifier, about $2,500 for the DAC. Okay, then the headphones. Abyss AB1266 Phi TCs. So these are one of the most expensive headphones on the market. You can get the light version of this, which just comes with their standard cable for about $5,000. But we have the deluxe version with the very nice XLR cable that this comes with for $6,000 total. So this whole system altogether comes in about $13,000. Definitely a lot. Okay, so let's talk about my setup with the DAC for this build. So this does have a few options in terms of the filtering and the outputs that you're using and the output volume that you're using, tubes, no tubes, etc., etc. So I'll run you through what I have going on. This thing can run DSD, but I'm choosing to use USB without DSD for this particular build. I don't feel like the DSD really makes a big difference with this system, so I'm not really using it. So I do have this USB in using the Bit Perfect filter is what I'm settling on. No tubes on this particular system, and then the gain and all these amplifier settings don't really matter. Now, one thing that might actually go unnoticed if you do get this is the output mode in the back. And it's this little switch that you can turn with a knife or a small screwdriver, and it's got Pro Variable, Pro Fixed, Hi-Fi Variable, and Hi-Fi Fixed. Now the fixed outputs for each is a constant all the way 100% volume out at all times. The variable is controlled by the volume dial on the front of the actual DAC, so you can control the output volume with this. Now the difference between Hi-Fi and Pro is just the output voltage. I think the Pro has an output voltage of 11.2, and the Hi-Fi is about, I believe it's about 4.6, but don't quote me on that. That's actually been what we're using with the system since this is not a particularly powerful headphone amplifier. I'm trying to make this amplifier work as little as possible in this scenario, so I am using the Pro Fixed output. No need for variability for me personally. So the Manly amp. So one of the downsides of this amplifier is that it's only single-ended inputs. This has some benefits. You can use the XLR outputs out of the DAC for a separate amplifier or for a different system if you choose to, but obviously you don't have to. But we are running RCA out into this. I think for the price, it's pretty reasonable to desire this to be a fully balanced amplifier, but it isn't. Now, one unique feature of this is that you do have all your options on the front of this system here, but you have all of your inputs and all of your outputs, and I mean all of them on the back. So your inputs plug in right here, you have RCA outputs if you want, but you also have your headphone outputs out the back. And that's what we're gonna be plugging this really nice Abyss cable into, that XLR cable in the back. This also has a locking mechanism, so when you do put this XLR in, it pretty much stays in, and you can't pull it out until you push the button to pull it out. Now, as far as options go on the front, and what we're running here is you actually have a headphone impedance setting that you can set in the front, and you can go between L, M, and H, which is low, medium, high. Low covers 12 to 50 ohms. 50 to 200 for the medium, and 200 to 600. Now the AB1266 is 47 ohms. And so I go between low and medium. Medium actually has a little bit higher volume output, and I actually prefer that mode. It just sounds a little bit better because it's a little bit louder without having to push the amp as hard. It's not technically within that 50 to 200 realm, but it's really close, so I don't think it's causing much of an issue at all. I just prefer to use the medium over the low. Now up here, you also have additional tone controls. So you have a treble and bass adjustments. You also have a balance, which is basically just left to right balancing. So if you have a slight mismatch or channel imbalance, you can actually correct that. And then you have something called a feedback control, which is just a gain boost essentially, up to about 10 dB. Okay, now the last and potentially most interesting thing about this amplifier is up front they have this little switch here that says PP and SE. And this actually switches this amp's topology between single-ended and a push-pull topology. And you can just, on the fly basically, switch between the two. There's a small delay, but you can't switch. Okay, here's the thing with this. Anything planar, use the push-pull. Just trust me on this. I have dynamics here that go back and forth between what dynamic sounds good with the push-pull and what sounds good with the single-ended. But across the board, not every planar sounds good with this amplifier, but every planar sounds better on this amplifier with the push-pull than it does the single-ended, including, of course, the 1266 that we're using today. The way I describe it is like across the board, it seems like the push-pull is just, it's better controlled. It doesn't sound loose. And loose doesn't mean warm or anything like that. It just means less precise, but it's all across the board. It's not just affecting your highs. It's not just affecting your imaging. It's affecting your bass, your mid-range, your tonality. It's affecting all of it. So push-pull is the way to go, I think. Okay, so this pairing is awesome. What this does is it allows the 1266 to remain a 1266 and do what it's good at, but benefits some other areas. This is a headphone that is so technical on its own that adding a little bit of life and a little bit of warmth in some areas without stripping away information is, I think, what I would want from this headphone. And I think this particular system does it in a unique way. I'm not sure if it's the best way that I've heard, but it's very unique and it sounds wonderful. Sounds great. So treble response is the only aspect to this entire build that I actually find to be a little bit lackluster. Now, what's interesting is that tube amplifiers with planars, especially in the treble response, is notoriously kind of iffy. Really depends on which tube and which planar you're talking about, but in general, they're not really great pairings all of the time. And in fact, I would more often steer people towards an average solid state than I would even a really good tube if you're using planars exclusively, just kind of as a general rule of thumb. Now, what's interesting here is that the aspects that I would normally complain about with tubes is not the problem here. The detail retrieval is the same. The treble forwardness and variability is the same. The dynamics are good. None of that's the problem. The problem here is the timbre. This headphone has a very high flexibility for timbre characteristics in the treble response. It can take on the shape and flavor of just about anything that you play through it. But this seems to be pretty limited for the cost at least, and I'm not really getting as much flexibility and kind of vibrancy is that even a word? It's not as vibrant as I'm used to hearing with this headphone. And that was one of the only disappointing things, but when you're talking about this price, I think it's perfectly fair to be as critical as you want. Now that switches when we talk about the mid-range. The mid-range here was excellent. It still got that finite kind of position and definition that this headphone is really good at for the vocalist, but adds a little bit of warmth to the body without taking away any of the technical details. So I felt like this system, for the most part, about 90% of this headphone, it kept what it was good with and just added a little bit more, especially when you mess with the tone controls like we'll talk about right now. So bass response tone controls. There are good ways of doing tone controls and there are bad ways of doing tone controls. This, I think, is a fairly good implementation, and I've actually found that I like this more than I would EQ if I were to EQ this with a solid state amplifier. Now with this setup, what's interesting is that if you're just using it bare with no tone controls and you're just doing kind of the EQ off, I actually don't find the bass response to be nearly as good as even an average solid state with this particular headphone. But when you use the tone controls, I actually would prefer this bass response over a solid state with an EQ'd bass response for whatever reason. I actually find the bass response out of this to be absolutely delicious. It's awesome. So there is a ratio between bass strength and bass quality. Now with most headphones, as you go up in either direction, you're going to lose a little bit in quality or you're going to lose a little bit in strength, and there's no way to recover both. This headphone starts from such a high point of clarity that any detail loss, I really couldn't tell the difference with. So I really felt like this took the bass detail, which was a 10 out of 10 before, and the bass quantity, which was about an 8 out of 10 before, to a 10 out of 10 for both levels. And I find this bass enjoyable for kind of all aspects and types of music. This can handle masterclass recordings like Alexis Cole has, or it can do really fun, easy to listen to, enjoyable stuff like Billie Eilish's music, and it's going to sound great for both. Okay, so to wrap this up, should we talk about value? It's a terrible value. It just is. It's not a good value. Does it sound awesome? Sure, it sounds incredible, but it's just not a good value. But that's not really the point, is it? It's designed to be an overkill system. It is an overkill system, and it was both an honor and a privilege, and I'm incredibly grateful to be able to have heard a system like this and test it out here. So I guess an interesting question from all of this that I would ask you to leave a comment in the comment section down below. What would be your max budget for an entire system? So your DAC, your amp, your headphones. You know, if you just want to give me one number, you can, but it'd be cool if you could break it down into like X number for headphones, X number for DAC, X number for amplifier. And I mean, like, you know, not as if you won a $500 million lottery or anything, but like, what would you feel like would be the max that you would pay within your normal life? Because this is far beyond what I would pay, way beyond what I would pay. But it's so cool to hear. So I'm curious what you guys think about that. All right, thanks a lot for watching. Till the next video, my name's Josh, signing off. Bye, guys.